Okay, so let's get to work. Today we have as our topic for collective intelligence, sabotage and other malicious action. We've been, for most of this course, we've been talking about all the marvelous things that we can accomplish by using collective intelligence in our projects, maybe together with some other computing skill or ability. In some cases, not even depending so much on that, considering that most of the infrastructure that we need for collective intelligence to happen is already there nowadays in the internet, in Web 2.0, and even our, I will call them open social networks, although they're not open, technically open, but social networks where the users themselves can organize large groups of people and explore their ideas, their opinions, and even their work to accomplish a specific task or a specific target or objective. We can say that we don't even require technological skills or computer programming or computer analysis skills to develop collective intelligence. So I guess this is probably what makes this such an interesting topic, not only for computer science students, but also for people in business and sociology and so many other areas, finance and so on and so forth. We don't need necessarily to have computational skills, what I mean programming skills, in order to start benefiting from projects that include collective intelligence concepts in them. However, there are also problems, and today we're talking about the, I don't know if it's the dark side, but it's another thing that we need to consider here. That is, not everyone will be aligned with our objective. In fact, there will be situations in which other people will benefit from making sure that our efforts do not get to a successful, to accomplish its successful target or its objective. Right? This happens in cases of competitions, as we will discuss today, but it also, in other cases, it may be just an ideological issue. In fact, it also happens in one of the competition situations that we will discuss today, that probably those that were sabotaging the system were not doing that only because they were in a contest, they were in a competition, and they wanted to win, but also because they thought that solving the problem by means of collective intelligence may be cheating, for example. Cheating in the sense that if in a competition others are using some very high-tech computing skills to do the job, and you go there and say, well, instead of using graphic computing or something, I'll use human eyes to check that I just have many eyes that can be involved, and then maybe that's something that will make other people think that you're playing in an unfair way, as the way it happens in one of the cases that we'll discuss today. Maybe it's ideological in a much deeper way. You are trying to, let's say, involve people in a democratic citizenship fostering activity, and there's someone who doesn't believe or wish things to go that way, or the opposite. You know, maybe you're trying to develop something for a company, and there's someone at the other side who thinks that company is exploiting labor. In fact, this is one of the issues that has to be considered. If we crowdsource activities from the perspective of the organization, it's a cheap way of achieving its objectives. But what does it do to those who are involved? Are they all also going to benefit? Of course, we expect that even to motivate people, that they get some benefits for that. But as I've told you many times here, at least from my perception, in many cases, the benefits that is being provided to people, mainly in those cases where the objective is not an objective that will benefit all, is just little candies. You know, little candies for large companies to have big profits. Right? In that sense, there may be hackers there, and hackers don't need to be very sophisticated when we are talking about collective intelligence, because usually collective intelligence efforts cannot be so protective. If you put too many layers of protection and safety and security and so on and so forth, you start making the task become more troublesome for those who you wish to involve. And one of the reasons that you are usually able to involve hundreds, thousands, millions of people in your project is precisely because it's easy. If it becomes difficult because you need to check exactly who the person is, and make sure that it's not someone that will do some evil stuff there. If you start putting these layers of protection, you will make your system slower and at the same time less attractive. So there's a balance that we'll try to reach there between what we want to do to prevent sabotage or any other malicious actions to damage the work that we're trying to do, and the intent of making it as easy as possible for those who wish to help us, right? But one thing that we have to think is, even in those situations where we think that nobody can go against our project because the objective is noble, we have to think that an objective is noble for some, maybe for the majority of the people, but never for everyone, especially in a society that cannot, or that has not been able to provide all of its citizens with a feeling of fulfillment, a feeling that of belonging. You just have to walk around in a large metropolis anywhere in the world, and you'll see that there are many people there that you may call them citizens, but if you ask them if they consider themselves as citizens, they will say no. That they will show you that you don't treat them as citizens. You don't try to have them involved in a way that they feel that their life, that they're belonging in that group, that they belong in that group, and that their belonging in that group is meaningful to them. So there's lots of possible enemies, let's say, to your objectives, even if you think that your objectives are noble and that nobody should go against them. So the papers that we have for today, or the ones that I expect you to have read, are Trying to Achieve a Neutral Point of View Based on Collective Intelligence by Greenstein and Su, 2012. Governance in the Face of Sabotage and Bricolage, Paquet, 2001. This is a little more philosophical, less, maybe when you read it, you had the impression, how does this fit together with other papers that we read here? But it's, let's say, it's a different layer of concern with collective intelligence. And then probably the three that are more aligned with a more practical view that I want to put emphasis on, particularly now that we're getting closer to the end of this course, and that you definitely have to grab a project, right, for those who wish to finish this course with a project either for a thesis, a dissertation, or even for the undergrads that are here for a conclusion work. I feel that you need some practical guidance at this stage, and so I will focus today on these three last works. How a Lone Hacker Shredded the Myth of Crowdsourcing. This was, this is more like an article in a magazine. It's not an academic paper, but in fact, if you're curious, the author here mentions at least one academic paper that was released afterwards based on problems that are discussed here in this article. And then Crowdsourcing Isn't Broken, which is sort of a reply to the previous article from someone who says, well, I feel that you got a little too pessimistic there with respect to, well, they're talking about crowdsourcing here, so let's use that term, crowdsourcing. We could use collective intelligence or Web 2.0 or whatever. So we'll probably put a lot of emphasis on those two magazine articles. And then we have a master's dissertation from this guy in India, Abhinav, who is also trying to discuss to some extent what he calls the truthworthiness, difficult word, the truthworthiness of in crowdsourcing, which is basically trying to figure out who is there to help, who is there, maybe, who's there definitely to help and is helping, who is there to help but is not necessarily helping due to the way that they're behaving, and those who are there to actually try and prevent you from achieving your objective, right? I think it's interesting for you to have a look at a dissertation that is made. It's an academic work. It looks let's say, a lot as the dissertations that many of our graduate students write here in Brazil. Maybe we put a little more emphasis in some topics, a little less emphasis in other topics. So I wouldn't consider it as a very good model for the format, considering our academic community here. But I think it's a fair work that has some insights, and besides has some links to some good references, depending on where you want to go with your projects. Okay? This is actually our last class in this format. Next week, as I was telling my wife this morning, I've been waking at 4 o'clock every Friday morning to just make sure that I reread or browse the papers that I want to discuss with you, some of them that I've read quite a while before. And then I told her today before coming here that this was the last Friday that I would have to do that, because next week you will have 3 of the students from previous years. I maybe say last year, Fernando and Valmir were here last year, the same way as you are. So you have a chance of see how much they have developed their work since then. And Rafaela has just finished her thesis and finished her master's dissertation. She's presented her work last week, so she'll be really relieved because it's going to be the first talk about her work after she has put a period, a final. Some people say that you don't finish a dissertation or a thesis, you abort it. So after having aborted her work, it's going to be the first time that she will be talking to people that are not there just to see the problems, as we usually do when we are, the people that are checking her work. So it's be a friendly crowd to these guys. They will be. Marina was asking me, will they be presenting in English? Yes, they will, and I hope they encourage you, or some of you, next year to come here and present your work as well. But I think it will also be a good contribution for those who are thinking about the project, right? And in 2 weeks from now, then you will take the exam. Marina, again, before the class today, was asking me, it seems that you have to choose between one or the other. No, I would actually advise that everyone takes the exam. That will already make sure that you have a grade, so you have some final grade. That is not going to be so final, because if you decide to go for the project, which you have a little more time until close to the end of June, then you can eventually get a better grade. I wouldn't do the project for trying with the idea of improving the grade. And in fact, that's not the case. I hope that there will be. We usually use that normal curve. We'll have A's, a few A's. We'll probably have many B's. We'll have a few C's. We hope we will not have D's or E's, because those mean that you were not successful. And the idea is not, well, if I got a B, maybe doing the project, that's my chance of getting an A. Or if I got a C, it's not like that. It may happen. I can already, maybe we could already agree that the project will never put your grade down. I realize the amount of effort that you have to put into a project anyway. So let's say that even if the project doesn't get to the same standard that your exam got, I promise that we will not put any marks down after the project. The idea of the project is you will have other people, surely at least me, but if I can involve some other people in our research group to also review those projects, you'll have at least one, but maybe 2 or 3 comments on the project, and that may be an interesting way to go for whoever is deciding on a project for a dissertation, a thesis, or even for the undergrads, for your conclusion work for your undergraduate studies. Okay. All right. So the first paper for today is how a lone hacker shredded the myth of crowdsourcing, and you can already see from the title of this magazine article that I don't feel that reading the whole article gave me this impression that throw away crowdsourcing, it will never work because there's going to be someone trying to sabotage. I didn't have that feeling, but I have to admit that see the sort of things that we have in our Wesley Safadão. Come on. I promise that's not my inclusion. It is something that is in the ads there. But anyway, what I was saying is that I having read this article, I don't think that we necessarily needed the other paper's reply just to make us aware that we can still save crowdsourcing. But it definitely already makes us aware that if we don't take some sort of precaution, there is at least a chance that someone will be around to damage or to try and damage what we're doing. In many cases, just if it's just a few people, I think the author calls him, says, don't worry. There's no way that you can turn a jerk into someone who's not a jerk, right? but you should try and prevent jerks from being jerks, at least with respect to your work, right? We can discuss that, but some of the things that that are said here about this, the way that this team from the Southern California, no, where were they from? The guys who, but I think it's a university from, I think it's Southern California, or I don't recall now. They were led by that French guy, I will not remember the guy's name. It will appear here somewhere. But anyway, one of the problems, well, some of the problems that they showed, that they started late. They of course, they had to catch up because they were not there from the beginning of the contest. They didn't put any barriers. In fact, they even made some of the arrangements that they made in the software supposedly to help people be faster in solving the puzzle. Also ended up helping, as it will become clearer in the other paper, helped the sabotagers, I don't know how you call them there, well, those who were trying to also be very efficient in their work, right? But anyway, what is this DARPA challenge? In 2009, this American agency, pretty connected to, you know, the army and the way the Americans try to use computing to protect, let's say, their country, and also to be stronger against enemies. This agency decided that one way of stimulating the development of software that could help them in some of the issues that they needed was by making this contest, right? And it would be, in fact, think of a contest like that. It's a contest that attracts many computer scientists, many students from all over the country and even from all over the world to try and solve the challenges that they are posing. And by solving their challenges, which seems just a game, they're also detecting where the skills are to help them solve their real problems. So for example, in this 2009 challenge, that was finding balloons that were spread all over the United States in the fastest possible way, they were probably already considering ways in which people could in the future help by, in fact, at that stage they were thinking about crowdsourcing as one important way of doing that, but also other ways by using whatever other computer technology was there available. They were thinking about ways they could find out where problems were having, either involving external enemies or even internal riots or whatever. You know, it was a project with some military purpose. And this French guy leading a team at that stage from involving students and from the MIT was able to solve the problem much faster than any other team by using collective intelligence and by setting, you probably saw that the scheme of motivation that was there. We've already discussed motivation for crowdsourcing, for collective intelligence. What specifically did they use there? Some pyramid thing, right? They to distribute the money. You know, they were going to. I think there was a $40,000 or $50,000 prize, and the leaders of the team there didn't want. They wanted the glory of having solved the problem, but they didn't want the money for themselves. Of course, if they thought that they had a chance of winning on their own, maybe they would say, I'll do it on my own. But they thought it would be a wise way for them to motivate people if they said, look, if you get engaged in this, and if you get other people engaged, you will get some compensation, some reward for that. Of course, if those people help us to successfully solve the problem. Right? And by doing that, they were able to engage thousands of people, and that's what made them very quickly find where all those balloons had been set. Okay? Did this happen? We don't see this in this first paper. We'll see it mainly in the second paper. Did they already face any sabotage in the balloons project? Yes, the other paper tells us. So in this paper here, which means that maybe this French researcher and his team now in California should be a little more concerned about sabotage, because they had already experienced sabotage with the balloons project. The author of the second paper even claims that some of the photoshopping that was done to sort of say, well, there's a balloon here in places where there were no balloons, was so good that it was much better than the coding of the hacker that prevented the team from winning the second contest 2 years later. Okay? So they already had knowledge about that. If they didn't do anything about it, it was for other reasons. Maybe because they were late and they wanted to rush into the competition. Maybe because of that, even that issue of balancing, the easiness of people to take part into the project and your intention of preventing that bad guys get involved, right? Mm-hmm. Notice if you start filtering too much, you will end up with a much smaller group, or you make it much more painful for people to prove that they're honest, and some people will give up before starting. So this is an issue. This is going to be a dilemma in any collective intelligence project. Deciding on how you check for good or bad intentions or for good or bad behavior, and how you promote those people that are doing things according to your interests, and how do you put down, let's say, those that are doing things that go against what you would consider. But anyway, okay, when I said that by reading this paper, I didn't have that feeling, oh Lord, we have to now give up anything related to collective intelligence because sabotage will always be there. I didn't have that feeling, but there are a few sentences here that go in that direction. For example, they say here that, let me see if I get to this. Oh, this looks different to what I see in my paper here, but where is it? I will not find it here. They say here in the paper that maybe what happens in the second context, the one about the shredded paper. Notice also, it's very easy for us to notice there where the military intentions are, right? If you're able to recover the pieces of a puzzle that represent each piece of shredded paper that has gone through shredding machines, that's probably a good way for the police or for the army to get information that, let's say, terrorists try to get rid of. Right? So the intention, we very clearly see that these contests were working in that spirit of crowdsourcing, of stimulating different clever people around the world to solve a problem that interests a specific agent, in this case, this Darpa agency. Okay? And so they place this, the $50,000 prize, but they say here that after the problem with this group, the California group, Darpa has never had any other contest where collective intelligence was considered maybe one of the best approaches, right? They moved somewhere else. And they claim here, mainly the author for the second paper claims that this may mean that they thought that the possibilities of sabotage are maybe too large or something. I don't believe. Maybe it's just agencies in the United States work like agencies in Brazil or any other country. It depends on the government. It depends on whoever is leading at the moment. And if someone was doing something and was being successful, but that person or that group is replaced, it doesn't. Even if the project was an interesting one, it's not going to be continued simply because it seems that politicians always want to say that they did things from scratch. Everything that was done before them was rubbish, and they want their own, landmarks, and they can't cope with this idea that they just continued something that was doing well, right? So I wouldn't take it too seriously that the reason for which DARPA stopped having this contest after the 2011 contest was because they noticed that collective intelligence was easily sabotaged. But I do believe that that event has helped us all around the world reflect about how we have to deal with sabotage and with any other sort of malicious actions, because many times our intentions and the intentions of those that are collaborating are not so well aligned. So we'll notice that this doesn't happen just when there is a financial prize, a big financial prize like $50,000. It also happens when we're talking about 5 cents or whatever incentive Turkey, the Mechanical Turkey, the Amazon platform for crowdsourcing, gives people to collaborate in easy micro tasks, right? If clever people with different interests get to that, they say, well, I may get a lot of 5 cents in a very easy way by just cheating the system. And I will turn that into doesn't even have to be big money. for someone who's not interested in the results the crowdsourcer is going to have, maybe just getting $100 a week or whatever by pushing rubbish into databases doesn't seem to be a bad thing to do. So even for micro tasks that pay very little, you have to get ways of checking if those that are contributing are actually contributing, or they're just cashing in little or big money because you're being inefficient in assessing the quality of their work. So I don't believe, as it's said here, that in the paragraph of this paper, that the wisdom of the crowds might be nothing more than just a seductive illusion. Right? They say the ability of crowdsourcing to crack big problems seemed unlimited in 2009, but after 2011, people started doubting. Again, maybe it's a little extreme here, and maybe this is what bothered the author of the second article when he decided to. By the way, the author of the second article, I don't know if you noticed, that was the chief technology officer of Threadless. That is one of those companies that we've been citing as an example of crowdsourcing from class 1, right? Threadless, the t-shirts stamp company, has been using and has been inspiring other collective intelligence projects all over since it was originally founded. And so we have to take into account what that guy says, because he's someone who's been dealing with this kind of problems, and he says this has always happened, and we just have to find ways of dealing with it. Okay? Now I have the name of the guy, Cebrian. That's the French guy who led the 2009 group from the MIT, and that in 2011 was ahead of the Californian group. By the way, they talk a little bit about the projects of this Cebrian guy, and they say that the main focus of his research has been on how social networking can make it easier to find people and tackle real-world problems like global epidemics and disaster response. So notice, maybe this is an interesting topic, or these are interesting topics for people discussing collective intelligence. If anyone is still thinking about projects, maybe try and check in Google Scholar or anywhere else in some of our databases what this guy has been doing since, because some of his earlier, some of the work that he's done after this may be interesting and inspiring to your research. Okay. Notice the way that Cebrian considered that he could motivate people to join his group. In fact, he was able to join in a few days more than 3,000 people to help them with solving the shredded paper project. He says that the idea was if the team won, users would get $1 for each edge they matched correctly. I'm assuming that there were several puzzles. Some were easier at the beginning, and then others were more complicated at the end. They don't give us any details of if this is about all projects or only the projects at the later and more sophisticated stages. But anyway, I have to expect that in all projects altogether, there were less than, let's say, definitely less than 50,000 pieces, right? Because I'm sure that Mr. Cebrian was not willing to get money out of his pockets to pay anyone, right? And besides, there's a cascade thing here. It's $1 for each piece that they placed correctly. But in order to make sure that people were motivated not only to participate in the group, but also to invite friends, they were also willing to pay those who invited. So the person who recruited them would receive 50 cents, and the person above that, a quarter, or 25 cents. Right? So it's actually $1.75 that they would have to spend on each piece. So divide the 50,000 by $1.75, and you'll know the maximum number of pieces that would be in this, so that Mr. Cebrian would not have to need to put his hands in his own pockets to pay other people, right? So this probably gives us a hint of how complex this puzzle was, right? They definitely started from the number of parts in the puzzle to decide on how they would compensate people. What else do they say here? So there were 9,000 teams originally working on that. But they started late. They started after the others, 2 weeks after the others. They didn't have time to construct digital defenses. So this is such as verifying users' identities or limiting their access to completed sections of the puzzle. We were crossing our fingers, hoping we wouldn't get sabotaged. Right? But I think chances were big, and in fact, chances were that they would be sabotaged after other competitors knew about them. You know, we wouldn't expect any of these 9,000 teams to be sabotaged from the beginning if they were already doing poorly. But when you see that a team is being successful and you are in the competition, you may already have some reason to do that. We will see in the other paper that the hacker, he started sabotaging very lightly, and then he stopped, probably even because of moral concerns. It's not, we're not talking here about a gangster, or, you know, and then he went there and checked the rules of the game. And then he said, in fact, what I'm doing here is something that the army will wish someone does. Right? So it's part of the game. They haven't explicitly written, please try and sabotage the other teams, but there's no rule against it, either because they didn't think of it, or because they thought, well, maybe this is going to be interesting, because that's what probably terrorists or enemies will try to do to any efforts that the military are doing, right? But they admit here that they were not able to do much about that. The name of the university is UCSD, University of California in San Diego. So it's not the University of Southern California. That's also another university in I guess also in San Diego. But this is UC, like we have UCLA, UCSD here. Okay. What is this? I'm just reading something that I had underlined here. I too am working on the puzzle. This is, I guess, it is the hacker, after having hacked, giving them a message why he did that. He said, I'm also working on the puzzle, and I feel that crowdsourcing is basically cheating. Notice, not everyone is aligned to your objectives. This is definitely going to happen, and I think it will happen each time more, with more intensity when we're talking about companies crowdsourcing activities to people in the crowds, because there will always be in our society, we have had this crisis between capital and labor. At least we've acknowledged it, at least since Marx, right? And this is something that is very present in our society. If someone perceives a crowdsourcing effort as a way of exploiting the crowdsourcee, not the crowd, or the crowd, if anyone perceives the crowdsourcer, the one who's crowdsourcing, who's paying, as an exploiter, there will already be some ideological reasons for sabotage there. Right? Another company, right? So some of these may be, I don't know if we should accept anything for ideology. I think we have been accepting too much for ideological principles, and we forget that we are all human, and even if we think differently, we should respect each other. Right? So I don't take this idea that people do things for ideology. I don't think that ideology should be higher than other principles in life. But anyway, there will be people that will be doing things for ideology. There will be people that will be doing things for financial interest. And there will be people that will be doing things for fun, even for fun, right? In a society that gives people so much time to have fun as ours. I'm not complaining about that, but it seems that there are so many people that have so much time. In fact, that has been some of the arguments for us to engage these people in something productive, right? If they're just enjoying their time, yeah, build a game and allow them to help you solve a problem that you have, because they will be playing and you will be solving your problem, right? But we have to think about this. Notice, this guy was not doing something that he was not considering himself a cheater. He says, using crowdsourcing here seems to be cheating, right? For what should be a programming challenge about computer vision algorithms, crowdsourcing really just seems like a brute force and ugly plan of attack, even if it's effective. In fact, I would say that in my perception, collective intelligence, when we're just trying to use collective intelligence as a replacement for algorithms that we are still unable to develop computationally, I think they are just brute force. Right? And if they're just brute force, what are we doing here ideologically? Right? Why are we so enthusiastic about collective intelligence? It is because I think it goes much beyond that. Right? It may be a brute force way of solving even mathematical problems that we are still not able to do with computer science, but we'll solve those problems soon, right? I would say that most of most problems, or many of the problems where we just want to involve people because they are the cheap way of doing something that would be expensive or even impossible to do with computers at these right moments, these things will be solved soon. But there's another thing that we should think of. Engaging people, and mainly if we can align their interests, may be a way of keeping even humans in some control of the situation in the future, because we will be able to, by participating in large efforts, we'll be able to have our interests, our goals, collective goals, happening, right? I think that we have a bright perspective for collective intelligence to deal with citizenship and to deal with any sort of involvement of humans and interaction with other humans in a much larger scale than just family or neighbors, or those with whom people had contact in the past. And I'm saying had because it seems that we don't have contact with our neighbors and our family any longer, right? Or at least we have much less intense contact than in the past. But we will have to build this sort of community feeling that is not a community feeling just with those who live in the same apartment building, but those who live in the same planet as we do, right? Maybe we have to borrow from Spielberg's metaphor in E.T., where he made us all feel that's probably many of you haven't even seen that movie. It's a movie from the 80s, but it's a movie in which he wanted to inspire us, showing us that we are all sort of astronauts in this spacecraft called Earth, right? So if we are all just passengers or the crew of this spacecraft, and this is where we all live, maybe we'll have to find ways of together deciding how we are going to live our future in this spacecraft, as it seems that we will, as a species, live here for quite a while, right? If not forever. But anyway, what else we have here? There was also a plan to develop a reputation system where only the best performing users would be allowed to contribute to the puzzle. But they never placed that. They didn't have time to do that. In fact, one of the interesting things in this that it results from that is a lesson from this Darpa contest is that it's very easy to demoralize a group that is working on a collective project, right? The same way it's easy to engage people at first, if results don't start showing, and don't start showing soon so that people realize, yes, my effort is being paid off, people will abandon the initiative. This is also something that we'll have to consider. Crowdsourcing depends a lot of word of mouth, people telling other people and involving other people, and that happens fast, and we have to have all the infrastructure placed to deal with the number of people involved getting larger and larger. After that happens, we should still be able to allow for a larger group to work effectively together. I remember when, again, some 30 years ago, we were starting to have, it was before the internet. We had those, how did we call them? You already connected your modem to a, I'm getting old. I keep forgetting words that I shouldn't. I remember that Izami, one of these our national magazines, once brought it was a diskette for sure, like one of those 5 1/4 inch diskettes with software that you installed in your computer, and then you were connected to. It was not a LAN house, or it was much before that. Carlos, it's a stupid word, but anyway. And then you connected to that, and then you could already use email. You could send messages, and of course it was a primitive thing. I'm talking about 1980s, 80, 87, 88 or something. And then there was this company here from Curitiba that was sort of one of the leading companies in Brazil doing that. It was still a small company, but they were aggressive. In fact, it was their diskettes that was there in this national, in this magazine that many people had access to. And what happened when people tried to use the service, the company itself caused a denial of service, because it was many people trying to use their service. Gee, will I not remember it? And the company went bankrupt, simply because they had not thought of an infrastructure that was capable of dealing with such an increase in the numbers of people using their service, right? But pardon? Yeah, well, dial-up was one way of. This was much after. This was dialing up was one way of connecting to the internet. But this was already in the late 90s or so, right? Or the 90s. You would connect to the internet by, yes, well, actually phoning there, and you did that through a regular telephone line. And this was also through a telephone line, but it was much before. It was definitely dialing up, but we didn't call it. There was a different term for that. But anyway, what I'm saying is, if you want to engage a lot of people, make sure that you have the infrastructure, and make sure that the service is going to work when they try. Because otherwise, you've made the effort, you attracted people, and then when they try to help you, they can't. And then they feel frustrated and they go away. So I'm saying in this kind of contest that these guys were involved, you can imagine. I mean, I don't recall if there was ever one team from UTF-PR in this contest. I don't believe so. But I think they're all as amateur as we are here. You know, it's just grab a lot of people. In fact, this Serbian, what's his name? Serbian. This guy here, he said, my main role was to keep people enthusiastic about the job, to motivate them and keep them going, which he was not able to do after the first attacks because the group was demoralized. They felt that they put effort into building or putting some more little pieces in the puzzle, and then the hackers were more efficient in dismantling all what they had done. It's usually difficult to separate the good guys from the bad guys, but it is a task that we have to go through. Yeah, some of the things that they were trying to do was to try and see, for example, they thought that maybe when they noticed that they were being hacked, they thought that maybe those that were doing things really fast were the ones that were hacking. Because of course it's much easier to get a piece out of a. But then they realized that some of what was happening there was actually people that were trying to help, noticing that a part had been taken out, and they were trying to push them back in. So in fact, they were only able to understand what happened years later when the French guy here got the help of that other guy to analyze the data from 2011, and that's when they even were able to track the hacker, and the guy who wrote the paper here was even able to talk to him. Right? Okay. Oh, I think it's this Stefanovic, right? Stefanovic was a guy who was it's in this same paper. This Stefanovic was a guy that Serbian contacted. In fact, they both have a paper that they wrote. If you look for their names in Google Scholar, I did that today at 4 o'clock in the morning. Unfortunately, it was not. I didn't have the time to read it yet. But they wrote a paper in which they describe an academic paper in which they not only describe what happened here, not in a journalistic way as the magazine articles that we're reading, but they discuss ways of preventing it. In fact, this is a paper that I hope I will include in this course next year, right? But of course, I first have to read it to check how it is. But I already invite you to do it. Not very difficult to find. It's just to write this Stefanovic's name and together with the Serbian not Serbian. It's Serbian. What else we have here? One of the things that they assumed was that they were being attacked by many people, right? And at the end, they found out years later that it was in fact one of the tools that they had built to make their own, or the people that were supporting them, more efficient, that actually made it so easy for the hackers, right? So this is also something for us to consider, making things easy, but maybe not so easy that the tool can be used also to dismantle what we're doing. People who are working and helping us in a, let's say, diligent way, they're doing, it's an ant's work. It's doing the hard work little by little, right? If you provide them with a tool that helps them to do things really fast, two things may happen there. First, you may turn good supporters into people that are doing things fast just for the little money that they may be getting, or the whatever other reward they're getting. So you may corrupt good supporters, and you may provide tools for those that are sabotaging to do their work faster and more effectively. So at the end, they question if it's the end of crowdsourcing, right? And here they're already mentioning this paper that I'm recommending you to read. Stefanovic in Stefanovic's and Serbia's paper, they conclude the real impact of the attack was not to destroy the assembled pieces, but to destroy the user base of the platform and to disrupt the recruitment dynamics. Well, notice that they're not saying it's the end of crowdsourcing. They're saying that you have to do something to prevent hackers, first, to prevent hackers to be more efficient than those crowds that you have. In general, the trend is you have crowds of supporters and you may have a few hackers. So you can't give those few hackers tools that allow them to be more efficient than the crowds that you have in favor. That's, for example, what Wikipedia does. Wikipedia has lots of people supporting it, and it definitely has people that, for the fun of it or whatever, will just go there and try to make fun, to cheat, right? Or to just change an article or something. But there will be people checking. And it is just important that you have more people checking than more people cleaning. I'd say more people cleaning the walls than people graffitiing the walls. In fact, this is a project that I have encouraged one of my undergraduate students to take to work on developing a collective intelligence, or to develop a collective intelligence project to clean the graffiti in the city. Let's say the graffiti, not the graffiti art, the ugly graffiti, right? And the idea that I discussed with him was that there's much more people in the city that are probably annoyed with the ugly graffiti than people considering that art or their way of expressing themselves or whatever. I understand that there's arguments to say that that's, and that also shows that, again, that we are not all citizens that think that the city should be the same. But again, if the majority of the people think that it should be one way, how can a smaller group impose on the majority their own wishes? So why are they stronger? Because we're not mobilized, we're not organized. I say it's so easy it seems so easy. Of course, we have to start this knowing ball, but basically we just need to coordinate ourselves. We need to provide some effort, some motivation, for example, for entrepreneurs or for companies to help. For example, whatever companies sell ink for people to paint their houses would be good sponsors to provide volunteers with ink to go there and paint paint back the walls the color they were, right? I think we could even, the same way as vandals or hackers can demoralize a large group doing little effort, if we consider person by person, can demoralize them as well when they want to show their friends their impressive work of art, and when they get there and it's already painted the color it was before, right? But unfortunately, this project is going slower than I expected because the student has some other priorities in the moment. I think it seems. But anyway, it will happen one day. I think it's easy, and this is one ways in which we should organize as citizens. Again, I don't want to put or to prevent people from expressing themselves. I just want to figure out, to prevent them from expressing themselves in a way that is bad for the rest of the population, and maybe also finding ways that we can include them so that we can align their interests to the interests of the majority. And I'm not talking here about a democracy of 50% plus one. I'm talking about maybe 99% wanting something and 1% doing something else. If it was 49%, maybe I would say maybe my aesthetics is wrong. What I find beautiful and ugly is wrong. Or maybe I have to accept that parts of the city will have to look that way because it's what other people find beautiful. But it doesn't seem to be the case in this case. All the motivation generated by weeks of good PR. What is this? Do you have any ideas of what PR means here? A fun task and a smart financial incentive scheme evaporated. Right? So they were demoralized. Our results raise caution in the application of crowdsourced problem solving for sensitive tasks involving financial markets and national security. Although this is also part of the conclusion of this paper that I haven't read, so I shouldn't be expressing my perception about something that I haven't read yet. But I would say, I haven't read and I already disagree with this. As we've seen with prediction markets and crowds can be very efficient in helping us solve financial market problems, mainly if they're putting their own money at risk. You know, like when they're buying assets, for example, they're not buying assets to cheat. Well, some will, right? There's even some large investors sometimes do this. They do some movements in a different direction than what they actually think that they should be doing to try and move others that way so that later they can do something differently. I accept that. But I wouldn't be so fast in saying that crowdsourcing cannot be used for these things. It's just that we have to be cautious, and we have to understand that there is not necessarily any alignment between our interests and other people's interests. And then again, quoting the authors of this paper that we haven't read, Sevian, and the guy with the Polish name, myself and others in the social sciences community tend to think of such massive acts of sabotage as anomalies. But are they? The expected outcome is for everyone to attack, regardless of how difficult an attack is, says Severin. It is actually rational for the crowd to be malicious, especially in a competition environment. And I can't think of any engineering or game theoretic or economic incentive to stop it. Maybe this is probably the part where he was more pessimistic about it. It's curious because we're talking here about a guy who has developed and has been successful with crowdsourcing. In fact, even when they lost the competition in 2011, they were sixth, right? They were, I mean, there were more than, how many, 9,000 competitors? They came sixth. So that's pretty successful, I would say, right? Still, right? Even with all the sabotage and everything, even with a demoralized team, with the self-esteem of the crowdsourcees very low, they were still able to be one of the groups, the most successful groups there. Yeah, but they keep saying here, you always get more bang for your buck by attacking rather than defending. So he's claiming that there is more advantage to attack than to defend. And then they have a last session here in which they call Every Crowd Has a Silver Lining, where they're telling us about ways that you can prevent that. One way is reputation, right? Systems where individuals can build up a good reputation are, and then they put in brackets, probably not as prone to devastating attacks from others, which are systems where reputation building is clearly there, that you see on this on the web. If you think, for example, any of these sharing, well, not sharing or places where people can sell things to other people, for example, like eBay or here in Brazil, Mercado Livre, there is a reputation to be built because, of course, people are scared of the unknown. And then after you have a reputation, in fact, a reputation is important because no one who has a reputation wants to have the reputation biased. Right? The reputation is an important asset. Okay? But we can use this in other in our projects as well. And notice that the reputation, in some cases, it's the reputation that is apparent to other users, mainly if they will have to deal and share information among themselves. But there's also a reputation building with yourself as the crowdsourcer. One way of doing that, I think it will appear more clearly in Abhinav's dissertation, is by checking and assessing the quality of the work that is being performed, sometimes by including there in the middle of the tasks that you already have the results, just to make sure that by putting that effort, the crowdsourcee will respond with that result that you already have. So if the crowdsourcee responds correctly, you say, well, this is a guy, if this person responded correctly now, there's a good chance, and considering that they don't know which of the tasks that I'm asking are tasks for which I already have the results, chances are that they are doing a serious job most of the time, or all the time, right? And those who give me a wrong result, I'll say, well, chances are that this happens in other situations as well, right? So it will appear more in the other paper that is an answer, response to this one, and in the dissertation as well. So reputation building. Artificial intelligence, in some cases, it's curious because we use collective intelligence, at least according to some people's perception, like Adam's perception, the hacker's perception. He says you're using collective intelligence because we still don't have enough artificial intelligence to do the work. After we do, well, this is sort of cheating. This is the brute force being used. But now we say here, maybe we can check if collective intelligence is working correctly by including some artificial intelligence to check that. Right? It doesn't even have to be anything so sophisticated. I think I've already mentioned that. In fact, I think some of you helped Thais and Mateus with their project of detecting fraud in hotel evaluations, assessments. Right? That's what they're doing there is just a how do we call it, a specialist system, basically based on a few rules that will say if an evaluation has a larger risk of being bad or not, or being sabotaged to the system or not. Okay? So you don't even need to use any sophisticated artificial intelligence algorithm here. Sometimes just a few checks, automated tasks are already able to screen or to help you screen the good from the bad, although you'll never be sure. One of their conclusions, crowds are far more complex and far less wise than they first appear to be. I would say definitely far more complex than we thought 10 years ago. We still, and this is why we have been trying to involve sociologists, psychologists, and so many other areas to help computer science develop this. But I'm not sure if I would agree that it's the crowd is less wise. Maybe we should stick to, I mean, the crowd is wise if you use it wisely. And then this article here is concluded with some of Adam's remarks. Remember, Adam is the hacker. He says that he would prefer to be remembered as someone who improved crowdsourcing rather than killing it off. Right? He even claimed that I have some faith in the wisdom of the crowds, but there will always be a caveat, always a wild card. So this was this first article for today, and then we have a second article that is crowdsourcing isn't broken. Again, as I said, Harper, the author of this article here, again, not an academic. He was the chief technology officer of Threadless for a while, not at this stage any longer. So he even claims that some of the hints that he gives here of ways to prevent malicious actions may be maybe not outdated, but maybe there are already some newer or better ways of dealing with the issue. In fact, he even claims that, he even cites a few people. I think most of them he cites is like with an @ in their names. I think that these are probably their Twitter names. Right? Their Twitter names. So again, if any of you are interested about these topics, try and check what these guys are writing. Right? If they are still dealing with this or if they're still concerned with malicious actions in crowdsourcing and what new things they've been doing. In fact, again, this could be an interesting topic of research, mainly for undergrads, right? To go there and check, get into some of these forums on the web, check what guys like these ones here that appear. They're like Keelan, Blaine, Rebel, Score, Dylan R, and H Champ, and so on and so forth. Check what these guys are doing. Check if how things have evolved since the hints that are provided here by Harper. Okay. He claims that crowdsourcing is not, let's say, the issue about crowdsourcing is not the work itself. It is about the community, and I think in this case there is some agreement with at least with the researchers in the previous paper, because they noticed that the problem was their community suffered from the attacks. Right? So protecting the community may be something important here. In fact, I hope that when Rafaela talks to you next week, one of the things that she discusses is the way in which, in her case, she was studying a community of craftsmen that meet on that actually take courses through Facebook from a crafts woman who's in the sewing area. It's artwork, but related to sewing, patchwork, and things like that. And one of the important things that she noticed there was that they built a community, and that entrepreneur, the craftswoman, she was very keen in keeping that community active and keeping a community in which all those involved sort of helped each other and were protective about each other. Right? So protecting the community and making sure that the community has bonds and feels like a community may be an important way to go. Here he mentions again the fact that the group that participated, the San Diego, the University of California San Diego group that participated in the Darpa contest in 2011, had a late start. They were attacked, they were frustrated, and they were burned out. Right? They were working day and night to try and solve the puzzle. So all those things contribute to, to make the community lose its bonds and lose its capability of keeping as a group. Okay, then he mentions his background as the CTO of Threadless from 2005 to 2009, as he wrote here in 2015. So this was 6 years later, and he says some of the hints that I'll give you may already or could have already better ways of doing. But let's see what the main things are. Things that he mentions as being important. Tell your bad actor that being bad is not acceptable behavior. A simple "don't be a jerk" is surprisingly effective. Right? Of course, to do that, you have to acknowledge, you have to be able to notice that the person is doing something that goes against your objective, which may not be that easy. Right? But this would be one way of starting. And then also take harsh actions such as banning or freezing an account should be your last resort. Why? Because it's always possible for a hacker to create another account. Right? So, in fact, one of the things that he mentions here as a good way to go is, well, allow the guy to keep posting, and whenever he sees on his screen, all his posting, his malicious posting is still there, but he's the only one who sees it. Right? Don't allow others to see. He says that he even has some fun doing that, but at the same time he says, well, but you always have to be careful, because you don't want someone who's being bad at you to be really having the intention. You don't want this guy to be really angry, right? So there are a lot of hints here. Slow down his participation. Make sure that he sees that he has to wait longer than others have to wait to post something. Even make him seeing some crash or some error pages or something. So to try and demotivate this person. Enabling your community to help you is the best way. What are ways of enabling the community? If you think that you have many people that support you and just a few that are trying to disturb your work, you could allow people to help you check things that are weird by just marking things and saying this seems wrong, and then you can have a human check, or you can check that, and if it's wrong, again you mark that person and say, let me keep an eye on everything that this person does. Sometimes it's someone who's well-intentioned, but just committed a mistake, right? So, but you can keep an eye, and if you see that the problem persists, then you can flag this person and treat him or her as a bad guy, right? But always remember, they use here some language that we shouldn't be using in class, but pissed off people have infinite more energy, right? So you don't want to try and get into fight with them, mainly because you don't know who they are, and they know who you are. So even if they are just a few, you don't want a few people that are anonymous to be really angry at you, if you can avoid that. So you'll need to sap the bad actors with, you need to sap the bad actor's will to live as a bad actor. Everything should make their life annoying without pissing them off. This may be a little contradictory, but try to make it difficult for them to give you a difficult time. This is what they're saying. you could put all new users in probation and only allow them access to a few features, and only after you trust them, you provide them with more access to other parts of your system. What is the problem with that? This is good for security, but this is bad for the efficiency of your crowd work, right? Because you're saying, okay, you wish to help me, but I will leave you there in a quarantine, right? In 40 days from now, if you don't do it, I'll allow you to do little things. If you perform well, and if I feel that you're trustable, then I will allow you to go and actually help me, right? Maybe a lot of people will say, okay, if this guy doesn't trust me, I'll find another cause that I can help where I'm better trusted. So there's again this, how would we call this, dilemma of how far should I go with my security concerns without demotivating the good guys? How far should I go in my attempt to prevent bad guys from disturbing my work, if that's also going to prevent or make it difficult for the good guys to help? He mentions here flagging as an alternative. We've already talked about that. Marking someone as a spammer, flagging or allowing the good guys to help you, and realize that you don't know who the good guys are, right? So remember that whenever you allow someone to say that something is spam, you should have means of checking that, so that you don't prevent the good guys from doing their work. One of the things that robbers do when they want to get into a house that has an alarm, they make sure that that alarm goes on many times until the neighbors and even the owner of the house don't trust the alarm any longer, and they turn it off, right? Or they allow it to keep going, but they believe it's just a problem, and then that's when they crash into the house, right? So think that when you allow your users to mark other users' entries as spam, and when you allow them to flag content there, that's a tool that bad users could also try and use to make you feel that doesn't work, because they will mark as spam things that aren't. So you have to check what has been marked, and you also have to check who has marked. It's not easy to be the police here. Service slowdown. Try to make sure that the users that are, well, the bad guys experience a bad time with your system. Hide the bad actor from the population, right? You make the bad actor believe that it's causing an impact on others, when in fact he or she isn't. It only appears in their own screen. Prevent contagion. Prevent that the bad guys contaminate others with their bad behavior, right? And you may not be able to defeat a sophisticated attack by following these hints, but at least the unsophisticated attacks will slow or stop. And I would say that probably in most cases, most attacks will be unsophisticated attacks. We shouldn't expect them to be so when we're thinking of terrorists. We shouldn't think it to be so when we're thinking about large corporations, or at least in many cases. But at least you prevent guys who are trying to do that just for fun, or because they don't agree with your objectives or something like that. Okay, and then we have a last paper that I want to discuss with you today. That is actually not a paper. It's Kumar Abhinav's master dissertation. It's called here a thesis, but degree of, I think it's master in technology, master in tech computer science. Trustworthiness in crowdsourcing. This is interesting for us to maybe have a look at the format of this, because most of you will be writing reports that are sort of similar to this. I should go through the abstract, but what about the abstract? Let's go to the abstract and see if this guy has followed our rule of telling us what is done, how it is done, and then to what results he gets. So let me find here Mr. Abhinav's abstract. Do we have a clear objective there? Hmm? Again, notice that he says what he does, not necessarily what the objective is, but we can get what the objective was here. We investigate one of the key concerns in crowdsourcing of software development, trustworthiness of the crowd. In fact, at the end of the work, he says that two other things that should be considered is the trustworthiness of the crowdsourcer, and that's important for crowdsource to happen. If the crowd doesn't trust the crowdsourcer, it will not support it, right? And also trustworthiness of the platform. We need, for crowdsource to take place, we need a crowdsourcer, a crowdsourcee, or the crowds, not a crowdsourcee, but a crowds, a platform, and then of course also an objective, the task to be outsourced. Okay. Does he mention the methodology? Algorithmic techniques, yeah. And in fact, the algorithmic techniques is actually what he builds, what he develops. So this is definitely, this is clearly a work that was done in a computer science department, and it has the same sort of, I would call, problem that most engineering schools have. They go straight into solving a problem, but the methodology that we want is not, is actually the methodology of how they solved the problem. And actually, if the problem was solved, so we want a complete cycle finished here, right? So actually, the algorithm is more like the results of their work, of his work, than the way he solved it. And the problem with many of the research projects in engineering is that they don't concern about methodology. They say, I will use whatever resource I can have access to, and I will solve the problem. He's much more concerned in showing us how the problem solved than explaining how the problem was solved. And that is a little problematic from an overall scientific perspective, because we don't want something to be solved in a way that we don't believe to be scientific as scientists. Right? So here, even in our in applied computing program, we have been trying to emphasize that although people will accept that in the engineering and in computing, most people will not complain about that. People from other sciences will look at our work and say, what is the difference between this and something that could be done as consultancy or as just work that happens in a company? What is the difference between this academic, scientific work and something that people could do at home? I mean, outside the academy. So, because if the scientific method is not there, we're not doing science. But I'd say again, probably for those of you who follow what this guy did, you will have no problem if you are in a computer science school, because most of even our colleagues that teach in these schools only see science as developing products and building and even getting a patent for something. So if they get a patent, that's already, a patent is just as good or even better than a research paper, right? For the sake of building a different world. It's a different perspective, but again, it doesn't allow you to talk to other sciences. So it's just a little more effort to try and do things scientifically. So why not? Right? And why not being respected by your own little group, your own little community, and also by a larger community that will say, okay, this is an engineering project, but I see the methodology here, the methodology to build or to get to the product, not the methodology that is built into the product. Okay? Right. Okay, so this was the abstract. Let's see what else we have here. I'll start going a little faster. Well, of course, they're talking here about he's talking here about crowdsourcing of software development. Right, so it's a specific kind of crowdsourcing. And then he already mentions here these 3 platforms that allegedly are used by software developers to develop software using collective intelligence or using this the possibilities of crowdsourcing. Topcoder, Upwork, and Freelancer. I don't know if anyone has used any of those platforms. Haven't? Okay, this you have. Which one of them? Which one? The ones I had here was Topcoder, Upwork, and Freelancer. None of those. No.
I
In which one of them? Top coder. Freelancer. So, okay, all right. Okay, so this again, this could be an interesting research project for someone who doesn't have a research project. Get into one of these platforms, check the kinds of software that are being developed there. If they are, even check if they're better for some sort of development and maybe would pose problems to develop other sorts of software. I don't know, use these platforms as their observation space. And of course, the objective, the reason for the research, which is the most important, would be the most important thing, would have to be found after you see, well, observing this is what interesting question could I have, and to what interesting answer would I get to after I, develop the work. So maybe it's, I would say, as an object to be studied, see who is developing projects using this, what the advantages they have. Are the people that use this platform readily accessible? I don't know. I haven't been to any of them. But can you get their emails? Can you email them? Can you participate in a forum discussion with them? Can I do what we call netnography there? Become part of that community so that I understand how it works, and then I can explain it to the rest of the world. Well, there's a chapter here. Chapter 2 is on the background of crowdsourcing. Let me get chapter 1 was more introduction. Of course, it goes back to Jeff Hove, who've already seen before. It has a few definitions here. For example, crowdsourcing as a it is a problem solving as well as a production model, used to leverage the collective intelligence of the crowd to render brilliant solutions and ideas. Right? Down here, a little further, they mention that it may involve micro tasks sometimes, but it also may involve very complex interdependent tasks. And when we have complex interdependent tasks, that's that kind of situation where we could go back to Venkatraman and Henderson's models of the 90s, in which they said before you can outsource anything, you have to modularize. So what you do with a complex project, you subdivide it into several smaller tasks, even if they're interdependent, but this interdependency should be made in a way that you define the interfaces involved, right? And so if we're talking about writing software codes, you probably have to define very clearly what are the variables that get into your code, and what comes in and what should go out. That's the only thing that others need to know about what you're doing, right? Your code may be a black box. It doesn't interest other people what you're doing inside your code. It interests what variables get into your code, what variables you get out of it, and of course, what you need here is a good software architect to create all these little modules that can be then outsourced to the crowd. Right? And I believe that this is probably something that those platforms help you to do, right? To split a complex project into smaller parts that can be assigned to different people in a way that you can easily integrate them at the end. But I just believe that that's what happens there. Maybe someone who decides to study that can tell us in more details. There's this curious thing here showing, reminding us that crowdsourcing is not necessarily something that was born with the internet, right? Although it's the internet definitely has leveraged it to an extent that was unimaginable before. They say here that in 1936, Toyota had a contest to redesign its logo. It involved 27,000 people that took part of it. So that was already crowdsourcing, right? They mention here, this is the Toyota thing here, and then Abhinav mentions here all those involved in crowdsourcing, the crowdsourcer, the crowds, the platform. Well, we could also talk about the activity being outsourced. Another interesting thing is when he starts categorizing the models of of crowdsourcing, a competitive model in which first the crowdsourcees compete among themselves and just the best solutions are picked out, or a hiring model in which the crowdsourcer chooses from the crowds people to involve in a specific project. I would claim that there are other possibilities in addition to those, but let's skip to what the author included here. Benefits for crowdsourcing: cost efficiency, time efficiency. So you have projects that will cost less and that could take less time to be developed. On-demand availability of human resources. You don't have to have these people as employees for the whole time if you will only need them specifically. And notice that this tends to be what will happen. We will all be crowdsourcees in the future, because the more companies work in projects instead of in developing products in a serial way, the more it will make sense to them not to hire us not to hire us for the whole time. Just hire us when they need it. Of course, this has to be very well regulated. I'm not sure if this is being done in Brazil. I always feel concerned about these things. It has to be regulated in a way that, again, in this conflict that we will always have between labor and capital, that labor is not put into a huge bias here. Of course, it's much easier for laborers to organize themselves and become more powerful when they're working together and when they know who the other laborers are, than when each one of them is hired only when required and works from home, as it will probably be the case for most of us in the future, right? So definitely laborers will lose at least part of their capacity of mobilizing when they don't know who the other laborers are and when they don't work together. But there's advantages. I'm not saying that this is necessarily bad. Working from home may be much more convenient for many people than having to go to the company. There's time concerns that moving in large cities has become each time more difficult. It takes long for us to go around from one place to the other. In addition to that, when we work from home, we don't have the boss at our neck all the time, checking what we're doing all the time. So we can work now, and maybe if we have to take the kids to school, or if we want to do a little core, we can do that, and then we come back, and we may work in the evening. We may decide to work on the weekends because we now have to do something else. I mean, we become, let's say, more empowered in the sense of deciding when we're going to do things to some extent, because we may end up working all the time, right? So there's pros and cons, but this will definitely be something that our society will have to discuss, so that we find a balance that is interesting to everyone. It surely will happen, right? We will work in an on-demand way. So yes, companies will say, yes, we need you, and we'll come and work, and then we'll say, well, now we're okay, we don't need you, and then we'll go to the beach, hopefully. And when they need us, hopefully they will pay us more for the fact that we will be readily available. And then when they don't need us, we'll have to be responsible enough to know that if they paid us more before, now we're not going to be paid, right? So we'll have to develop ways of coping with this different scenario. But anyway, better quality. There's some argument here. Do we get better quality from crowdsourcing all the time? Reasons to get better quality. We are not so... we have a much more diverse pool of resources. So we'll have more innovation, we'll have more creativity for sure, right? But the fact that these people are not so committed to us because they're not employees may sometimes they may say, look, I'm at the beach, I can't do that for you now, right? I don't want to go back right now. So people could be empowered in a way that the crowdsourcer finds it difficult to ensure quality all the time. So, but anyway, again, here there are arguments in both ways. Creativity and innovation we've already talked about. Challenges. Of course, one of them, task modularization. If I don't modularize products, remember he's talking specifically about software development, but it would also work for other things. But if I am not able to modularize, I will not be able to split or to transform a complex task into several easier tasks that can be performed by the crowd. The key challenge here is to maintain the balance between specifying the details for the task with the clear requirements and limiting the interdependencies. Right? So it's difficult to find exactly where to, what the modules should be. Information alliance and convergence. Is this? You have to coordinate with a network, anonymous and unidentified people, and the problem increases with increasing the size of the crowd. So it's not always so easy to get these information alignments, but it is something that is necessary. Otherwise, you will have to, the least you have this alignment between what people know about the product and what you expect them to do, the more difficult it will be for them to deliver the results that you need. Right? So this is actually this has always been a problem of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution considered that dividing a complex process into several simpler parts would make it much easier for untrained people to be able to perform in the assembly lines, for example, or the production lines. And in fact, it was. But then you had lots of people who were doing something that became meaningless to them. They didn't know in which way the work that they were performing was contributing to the product that was being built at the end. Of course, this causes at least people to be less satisfied with their work, right? Because they don't feel the reason for what they're doing. Right? This could also happen here. If you give people too much information, and mainly when you're talking about an anonymous and unidentified crowd, you may be providing the crowd with information that will end up in the hands of the competition, for example. So again, the dilemma of how much to give in order to get better results. Organizing and scheduling, the adherence of the crowd to the desired schedule for the successful accomplishment of the tasks is a big challenge as well in crowdsourcing. Quality, notice in the previous session it was talking about the benefits, now it's talking about quality again as a challenge. So there's some contradiction here. But anyway, you want performance and maintainability of the software that you build. And one way of doing that is maybe by doing some peer review of the material that is being coded. But there's a tendency of decreasing quality of work with increase in the number of participants. Why? The more participants you have, the simpler the tasks that they will be involved, the less meaningful the task is to whoever is doing, the less committed these people will probably be. Incentives and motivation. We've talked a lot about that in the past. We don't even have to talk about that now. Talent identification. To retain the talented crowd with the right expertise for some specific tasks may be a challenge to those that are crowdsourcing a task. Related work, we'll be talking here about work that other authors have done. Basically, it's a literature review. I think this is probably a place where you will find some authors that could interest you. Go to the references, look for them in the database, and I'm sure that you'll probably find most of that work available from the database you have access to here from the university. Here they have another long and broad definition of crowdsourcing, which I think that is worth considering. Crowdsourcing is a type of participative online activity in which an individual, an institution, a non-profit organization, or a company proposes to a group of individuals of varying knowledge, heterogeneity, and number via a flexible open call the voluntary undertaking of a task. Notice here that the voluntary undertaking of a task means that people will do that because they wish. They're not obliged to do it. It doesn't mean that they're doing it for free, right? They're volunteering to help, but they will only work because, as it will become clear next year, because there is benefits for them as well. The undertaking of the task of variable complexity and modularity, and in which the crowd should participate, bringing their work, money, knowledge, and or work experience or experience, always entails mutual benefits. If there is no mutual benefits, people are not going to bring their work, even their money, right? Their knowledge and their experience. They will bring that because they consider that there is something for them there. We've already discussed motivation a lot, so let's not spend too much time on that right now. The user will receive the satisfaction of a given type of needs, be it economic, social recognition, self-esteem, or the development of individual skills, while the crowdsourcer will obtain and utilize to their advantage that what the user has brought to the venture, whose form will depend on the type of activity undertaken. Right, so this is one of the broadest definitions that I've seen of crowdsourcing. Maybe it's one that you should keep in mind. Here again, the 4 pillars of crowdsourcing. So the crowdsourcer, the crowdsourced task, and the crowdsourcing platform. In the previous chapter, he had just mentioned the agents involved, and of course, the task is not an agent. The crowdsourcer definitely is. The crowd is. The crowdsourcing platform is also an agent. If we consider agents in a broader way, not only humans. We mentioned in a previous class that this goes well with Bruno Latour's actor network theory. Platforms have their own agenda, right? Platforms tell us what to do and push us into doing things, so we can consider them as agents, at least in a more flexible way of thinking of it. Okay. All right. What else we have here? Then when they talk about the aggregation, he talks about the aggregation approaches here. One interesting thing about aggregating the work of many people is that sometimes we want to have also redundancy. More than one person doing the same, which could be good for us to first check, sometimes check the best result and incorporate or aggregate the best result. In other cases, check if they got the right result, right? If 2 different people in 2 different places get to the same result, there's a good chance that that result is the correct result and not the result of 2 hackers trying to, to get whatever results to benefit from, or to get some financial benefit or whatever. Okay? In fact, this combination of redundancy and gold standards is to jointly estimate the correct answer for each task and quality score for each worker, which can be used to separate systematic workers' bias from unrecoverable errors. This may be one way of reducing that problem of sabotage, right, if we use this. The Abhinav, the author here, finds that there are 4 different kinds, actually 5 different kinds of crowdsourcees. The spammer, we don't want. The sloppy, we don't want. The incompetent, we don't want. The competent and the diligent. Probably these ones are the ones that we want. Although I don't think that we should, maybe when we think about competent and diligent, we shouldn't think as 2 different categories that cannot go along together. In fact, we want the competent and diligent, those that do the right thing and do it in good time. Okay. Then there's a table, table 3.1 here, summarizes basically summarizes the authors that were discussed first. I think it's a good, nice way of telling us what each one of these authors can help us with. I particularly think that at least for trustworthiness, I've already included here as my future reading, at least this paper here by Gajiraju et al., which I found that maybe has something interesting for this class. Maybe it will appear here next year if the paper is good. And I'm also interested in reading this Wang et al. Here. Both are papers that caught my attention when I read their titles in the references. Right? Maybe also for better understanding sabotage, maybe also this Kazai et al. In fact, I think this is a paper that studies a situation here in Brazil. Right? So. Okay, chapter 4. The author starts to try and build a taxonomy of trustworthiness, and here he mentions problems that we should be concerned about. The backdoor problem. If you have several different coders coding software for you, it may become difficult for you to find out if there is no Trojan or if there is no backdoor that is kept open for malicious interventions in the future. Think of someone, for example, coding passwords and then including there the possibility of an administrative password that he as the coder will be the only one to have at whatever time. Right? Of course, some of these things are a little more obvious. I'd say that more concern will be paid at an authentication code than to other parts of the code, but there may be ports that are left open. We never know, and so this is it could be a challenge. And there's also some issues here related to mainly to intellectual property that could be concerning. Think of situations in which the crowdsourcing happens by means of a contest. Someone wins the contest, gets a prize, signs a contract with the company saying, okay, I give the rights for the company to use my solution in their own behalf. What happens with all the contributions of other people that did not get the prize? They didn't sign any contracts. They gave ideas, at least. Those ideas were given to the company, and who has the right on them? Well, maybe they signed a contract, those very small letter contracts, to participate in the contest already, saying, well, whatever you participate is going to become the company's property. Okay, it's a contract. It doesn't mean that it's going to be a valid contract when exposed to a judge. I'd say that a judge could very easily find that it's very reasonable that someone who got $50,000 as a prize, that's a good compensation for the effort that they put into the code that they developed, and that the company is okay to use it. And besides, there is a contract to enforce it. Maybe it's not as easy for someone to argue in court that although someone signed giving up any rights they have on the code they wrote, they didn't get anything in exchange except the possibility of participating in the contest. That's one of those situations in which people say, look, I was forced to sign that. It was the only way for me to participate in the contest. And besides, I did not get any reward for that. I don't know what the judge would decide. At least it would, I believe that this would bring some, how we call that, there's a name for that, a liability. That's a doubt on liability, and the company would have to probably care for that, even so that it doesn't get a surprise, or in the future to realize that someone is suing it because of that, and they expected that they had that was their property because there was a contract, right? Most of the contracts that we sign on the web are not considered, or I wouldn't say most, but many of these contracts are challenged in court, and courts tend to say, okay, that case, it's impossible even that you are able to read that, so yes, that contract is not valid. Okay, what else? Oh, then in item 4.1, the taxonomy is finally presented. Maybe we could go straight to the table that is on table figure 4.3, where the author includes the items that were selected for his trustworthiness of the crowds. First, problems with submission of Trojan code, right? Something that shouldn't be there, a gift that you don't want. Non-adherence to best practices. If you're hiring people from the crowd, anonymous people, you don't know what sort of skills they have. They will be including software or parts of software in your more complex project, but you don't have complete control on the practices that they used, if they were good coding practices. Of course, there are ways of trying to check that, maybe doing some peer review, other people will check it, but sometimes checking what other people wrote as a code takes almost as long as writing the code itself. Right? So there's an issue here. Use of non-compliant licensed software. Think again, the misalignment between the interests of the company, and the crowdsourcer, and the crowdsourcee. The crowdsourcee is willing to get the benefits from from the work that is being performed, but wants to do the least possible work. The company wants the best quality for the least cost. Right? There's a chance that APIs from other companies are brought into the software that is being coded, and the company is going to be unaware that there is part of the code that already has property issues. There's a chance that open software is going to be included because for the person The person is interested in solving that problem quickly. It will solve that problem, but will eventually create another problem, because depending on the license of the open software, you can only use that if the software that you're creating is also open source. So if you're using it and you're going to compile and close the software again, that's not acceptable. So there's also a possible issue here. Well, network security issues, we've already discussed that a bit before. And the more you try to do something to reduce the risks, the more annoying or difficult you turn the collaboration, right? Loss of data, all sorts of risks. The author here mentions at least two situations, I think one with Netflix and one with American Online, in which the companies, they seem to be honest in trying to provide coders a data set, anonymized data set, but it turned out that someone was able to, with the information that was in those data set, crossing that information with other information, people were able to find who those records belong to, and of course that again can bring all sorts of problems, image problems for the organization, because it will be perceived as a leakage of information from users, or even legal issues with people suing those companies for not taking the required care of their data. Loss of intellectual property, litigation. Litigation here is basically because there's so many issues concerning who the owner of the intellectual property is, and so on. So there may be litigation with the crowds. For example, accused of borrowing ideas from non-winning entries in a competition, just like we just discussed. Or accused of improper employee benefits. Well, I'm working here. I'm not an employee, but the work that I've performed is similar to the work that an employee performs. So maybe the company is only using this as a way of escaping its obligations as an employer. Again, possibilities of liabilities there, fiscal, legal liabilities that should concern companies. And also social attack. The author here mentions the denial of service after acceptance. So the company is already expecting you to do the work, but you decided to stay at the beach. It's sunny and it's warm, and you decided that it's not to your convenience to do that now, and this brings problems to the company. Collusion attack when different users or different crowdsourcees decide to do things that are harmful to the organization. Well, many other issues here. The author discusses in chapter 4 all these items in this figure 4.3, and then in chapter 5 there's a discussion of how to deal with some of these issues based on the literature. So up to now he's not developing his own algorithm. He's only seeing what others have done, and in fact that's where we'll go. Right, we'll not get into his own work. We'll probably stop here after discussing these approaches that already appear in the literature. So we have here the concern of client on confidentiality of sensitive information can be addressed by using intellectual property modularity and selective revealing. You only reveal to those who will be your crowdsourcees what is important for them to perform their specific task. But of course, whenever you do that, that person or that group will have little understanding of the whole, and having little understanding of the whole will make them less interested about the whole project, and also less capable of understanding precisely what they have to do. So the partitioning of tasks into components has many advantages, as reducing complexity of the task, assisting proper segmentation of labor, and providing flexibility. However, it reduces the understanding the crowdsourcee has of the task that is being performed. Oh, there's still chapter 6 is still talking about the literature review. So maybe we should also check that. So here he's talking about finally the evaluation of the trustworthiness of the crowds. Right? It is likely that the developer decides on such a course of action that satisfies the minimum requirements to submit the task, but such actions could bring liabilities to the enterprise. And then he will talk here about, again, those things like Trojans, codes that doesn't adhere to the best practices, code that doesn't comply to license and property, intellectual property, and so on and so forth. One way of checking that things are done the way expected is to have a second crowd. You have a crowd to develop, and then you have a disparate crowd that is asked to verify the submission based on 3 parameters: whether the code is a Trojan code, whether the code adheres to best practices, and whether the code is compliant to the licensed software to get the issues of intellectual property. Then he talks again here on the importance of building reputation of the crowdsourcees, the gold standards approach, which is a set of questions. In this gold standard approach, you know some of, it's almost what happens when we, for example, to prove that we are humans, we have to check a set of letters in a pattern, and then sometimes you have 2 sets. One that is the one that is actually the idea there is to just check if you're not a machine, right? That's what they claim. But then 2 sets. One of them is a set that whoever put that codes, that image there, knows, and it will check against your answer. The other one is a pattern that they wish to understand. So they first verify that you're being sincere, and they will use that to allow you to go on with your whatever you're doing. But the second part, you're working for them, right? This is one of those ways of checking if people are sabotaging or not. You include questions, or you include tasks that you need developed, and you include other tasks that you already know the answer, but you just want to check if they're being sincere in the answers that they're giving. This is a way of, this is what they call here by this gold standard approach. You're having standards that you already know, and checking if the user adheres to them. Ways of deciding on the best approach, and here's where the author will get into reasons for his own work. The author claims that sometimes it's better to use just the majority voting, right, which is just getting the crowdsourcees themselves to decide on what is the best solution. And you could also use what they call here an expectation maximization algorithm. That would be an algorithm for finding the probability of variables, which can be used to estimate through labels and the worker's accuracy. In fact, by using this method, this algorithm here, and this is one of the things that the author wishes to do with his own work, is providing with a probability of saying if the crowdsourcee is doing a right job or is doing a poor job. Right? Well, I think the next chapter is already he's already talking about his own work, and it is not as interesting for us, because what I wanted, or at least for my purposes here, that was mainly to gain access to the literature review that this guy did, because he has many sources there that could be interesting to you as well. See, Magalhães, you were complaining that the other day I was talking for 3 hours. It's almost that again. So let's just maybe have a short break, some 15, 20 minutes, and then come back to work on our forum, right?